There is a saying in the underworld of Seoul: you can owe money to the banks, and they will take your house. You can owe money to the government, and they will take your freedom. But if you owe money to Baek Si-jin, he doesn't want your house, and he definitely doesn't want your money. Ayana Waridi thought she was walking into a business meeting to plead for an extension on her father's debt. She thought if she wore her best white dress, spoke politely, and promised to work hard, she could survive. She was wrong. She wasn't walking into a meeting. She was walking into a trap set by a predator who had been watching her for months. The Shadow King didn't buy her debt to collect payment. He bought it to collect her. This isn't a fairy tale, and he isn't a Prince Charming. He is a monster with a scar on his face and an obsession that burns hotter than hellfire. If you are addicted to stories where the villain gets the girl and the romance is dangerous enough to kill you, I need you to hit that like button right now. Drop a fire emoji in the comments if you think Ayana can tame the beast. Let's begin. The rain in Seoul always felt colder than back home. Ayana Waridi stood by the window of her cramped semi-basement apartment, watching the neon lights of the convenience store flicker against the wet pavement. She was 3 months behind on rent and her art supplies were running low, but she had always managed to scrape by. Until tonight. The envelope had slid under her door with a whisper, but it felt heavy as a brick in her hands. There was no return address, no bank logo, just heavy, matte black paper with gold Hangul characters embossed on the front, Dragon Holdings. Her fingers trembled as she tore it open. The letter inside was brief. Her father's gambling debt hadn't just been sold, it had been consolidated. The numbers swam before her eyes, too many zeros to comprehend. 500 million won. It was a life sentence. This has to be a mistake, she whispered, her voice sounding small in the empty room. She dialed the number printed at the bottom. It rang once. Miss Waridi, we've been expecting you. The voice was smooth, deep, and utterly devoid of warmth. I can't pay this, she stammered, gripping the phone tight enough to turn her knuckles white. My father, The debt is yours now, the voice cut in. Director Baek prefers to discuss repayment terms in person. Be at Club Elysium in 1 hour. Do not be late. The line went dead. Ayana stared at her reflection in the darkened window. Terror clawed at her throat, but she swallowed it down. She had no money for a lawyer, no family in this country to protect her. She only had herself. She went to her closet and pulled out the only formal outfit she owned, a simple, silk white dress she had bought for a gallery opening that never happened. It was elegant, but against her dark skin and the grim reality of the night, it felt like a funeral shroud. She smoothed down her voluminous curls, put on her drop earrings, and tried to look like a woman who wasn't about to shatter. The taxi dropped her off in the heart of the Gangnam nightlife district, but Club Elysium stood apart from the noisy chaos. It was a monolith of black marble and tinted glass, guarded by men who looked more like soldiers than bouncers. Rain lashed against her bare arms as she approached the velvet rope. Name? The guard grunted, not even looking at her. Ayana Waridi, she said, lifting her chin. I'm here to see Director Baek. The guard's eyes snapped to hers instantly. The air shifted. He stepped aside, unhooking the rope with a terrifying level of respect. Go straight to the VIP elevator. Top floor. He is waiting. As the heavy doors closed behind her, cutting off the sound of the rain, Ayana realized she hadn't just walked into a club. She had walked into the belly of the beast. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime that sounded more like a judgment bell than a welcome. The air inside the penthouse suite was thick, heavy with the scent of cedar smoke and expensive scotch. The only light came from the panoramic windows overlooking the rain-slicked city of Seoul, casting long, jagged shadows across the room. Ayana stepped forward, her heels sinking into the plush dark carpet. In her white silk dress, she felt painfully conspicuous, a single drop of milk in a sea of ink. 3 men were lounging on leather sofas, their ties loosened, bottles of liquor scattered on the glass table before them. They stopped talking the moment they saw her. One of them, a burly man with a jagged tattoo on his neck, whistled low and sharp. So this is the daughter, the tattooed man sneered, standing up. He walked toward her, invading her personal space until she could smell the stale alcohol on his breath. Your father ran like a coward. You think a pretty face pays off 500 million won. Ayana held her ground, though her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. I'm here to speak to Director Beck, not you. The man laughed, a harsh, grating sound. He reached out, his rough fingers grazing the delicate fabric of her sleeve. Director Beck doesn't talk to garbage. You talk to me. He gripped her arm, hard. Maybe we can work out a different kind of payment plan right now. Ayana gasped, trying to pull away, but his grip tightened. Stop. The word was spoken softly, barely louder than a whisper, but it sliced through the room with the force of a blade. The man holding Ayana froze. He released her arm instantly, stepping back and bowing his head in terrifying submission. The other men in the room went dead silent, setting down their glasses. From the deepest shadows in the corner of the room, a figure rose. Baek Si-jin stepped into the dim light. He was taller than she expected, radiating a cold, suffocating power. His black suit was tailored to perfection, hugging broad shoulders that remained rigid with tension. But it was his face that stole the breath from her lungs. He was devastatingly handsome, but a distinct vertical scar cut through his right eyebrow, marring his perfection and giving him a dangerous, predatory edge. He didn't look at his men. He only looked at her. He walked toward her slowly, his movements fluid and silent, like a panther circling prey. He stopped just inches away, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. The smell of smoke and cold rain clung to him. Si-jin didn't speak. He simply looked her up and down, his dark eyes traveling from her trembling hands to her wide, fearful eyes. It wasn't a look of lust. It was the look of an appraiser examining a piece of rare, stolen art. He reached out, his hand hovering near her face, and Ayana flinched. He paused, his eyes narrowing slightly at her fear. Then, without breaking eye contact, he tilted his head. Everyone out, he said, his voice deep and smooth as velvet. Leave us. The silence that followed the slamming of the door was heavier than the air in the room. Alone with him, the space felt smaller, the shadows deeper. Si-jin walked behind his massive obsidian desk and sat down, gesturing vaguely for her to sit. She remained standing. I have a proposal, Ayana said, her voice steadier than she felt. She reached into her purse and pulled out a crumpled notebook page. I work 3 jobs. If I consolidate my earnings and live on the bare minimum, I can pay off the interest in 5 years. The principal will take longer, but... Si-jin picked up the paper. He didn't read it. He just stared at her, a dry, humorless chuckle rising from his chest. It was a terrifying sound. 5 years, he repeated, looking at her neatly written calculations with disdain. You think you have 5 years? Slowly, deliberately, he tore the paper in half. Then in half again. He let the pieces flutter onto the glass desk like dead leaves. Your father's debt isn't a loan, Miss Waridi. It's a death sentence. And I am the only reason the executioner hasn't come knocking yet. He opened a drawer and slid a sleek, black leather folder across the desk. I don't want your money. It's worthless to me. I want your time. Ayana stepped forward, frowning. She opened the folder. The document inside was thick, stamped with the Dragon Holdings seal. The title read Personal Assistant Contract. An assistant? She looked up, confused. You want me to file paperwork? Read the addendums, he said, lighting a cigarette. Ayana scanned the pages. Clause 4. The employee must reside at the employer's primary residence. Clause 9. The employee is on call 24 hours a day. Clause 15. No external contact without prior authorization. Her blood ran cold. This isn't a job offer, she whispered, dropping the folder as if it burned her. This is ownership. You want a slave. I want a guarantee, Si-jin corrected, smoke curling around his scarred brow. I won't sign this, Ayana said, backing away. I'll find another way. I'm leaving. Go ahead. He didn't stand up. He didn't even raise his voice. He just tapped the edge of his desk. Go back to your apartment in Mapogu. Oh wait, my real estate division acquired that building this morning. Your eviction notice is already on the door. Ayana froze, her hand on the door handle. Or perhaps you'll fly home? Si-jin continued, his voice dropping to a smooth, lethal purr. I wouldn't count on it. Your student visa sponsor? They are a subsidiary of Dragon Holdings. I canceled your sponsorship 10 minutes ago. Walk out that door, and you are an illegal immigrant with a 500 million won bounty on your head. He stood up then, The predator finally closing the trap. You have no home. You have no country. You have nothing. He held out a gold fountain pen. Accept me. Ayana looked at the door, then back at the man who had systematically dismantled her entire life in a single afternoon. She walked back to the desk, her legs feeling like lead, and took the pen. The penthouse was a masterpiece of modern architecture, a sprawling expanse of black marble, floor-to-ceiling glass, and suffocating silence. It was the kind of home featured in magazines, but to Ayana, it felt like a mausoleum. She had a bedroom larger than her entire old apartment, a wardrobe filled with designer clothes she hadn't chosen, and a bed that felt like a cloud. Yet, every door leading to the outside world was locked, and the private elevator required a fingerprint she didn't possess. Her duties as a personal assistant were a farce. She poured his coffee in the morning. She organized books that were already alphabetized. She sat in the corner of his home office while he worked. It was a game of control, pure and simple. But the worst part wasn't the boredom. It was the weight of his gaze. Whether he was on a conference call with international investors or reviewing underworld ledgers, Si-jin was always watching her. His dark eyes tracked her movement across the room with a terrifying, heavy intensity, like a tiger lazily watching a gazelle graze, waiting for the moment to strike. He never touched her, but his stare felt like a physical caress, tracing the line of her neck, the curve of her spine. It made her skin prickle with a mixture of fear and a strange, unwanted heat. The illusion of safety shattered on the third night. Ayana had walked into the main living room to find Si-jin standing over a man kneeling on the pristine white rug. The man was weeping, his face swollen and bloody, pleading in rapid-fire Korean. Si-jin didn't yell. He didn't look angry. He looked bored. He simply adjusted his platinum cufflinks, nodded once to his security chief, and turned away. The guards dragged the screaming man toward the service elevator. Ayana gasped, dropping the book she was holding. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the quiet room. Si-jin froze. He turned slowly, spotting her by the hallway entrance. The cold indifference vanished from his face, replaced by that dark, possessive focus. He walked over, his shoes silent on the floor, avoiding the droplets of blood on the rug. He stopped inches from her, close enough that she could smell the metallic tang of violence clinging to the air. He reached out, his thumb brushing her cheek. His hand was warm, startlingly gentle against her trembling skin. "Go to your room, Ayana," he whispered, his voice dangerously soft. "The world is ugly. That is why I keep you up here." Ayana is trapped in a nightmare dressed like a daydream. Things are about to get much darker. If you're enjoying the ride, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss part 2. It was past 2 in the morning when Ayana found him in the library. The storm outside was battering the glass walls of the penthouse, but the chaos inside Baek Si-jin seemed far worse. He was slumped in a leather armchair, a half-empty tumbler of amber liquid dangling from his hand, his eyes closed. For the first time, he didn't look like a king or a monster. He looked exhausted. Ayana hesitated, then stepped closer. The dim light from the hallway cast a shadow across his face, highlighting the jagged, vertical scar that bisected his right eyebrow. In the daylight, it made him look terrifying. In the dark, it looked painful, a white line of raised, ruined tissue against his golden skin. Without thinking, driven by a sudden, reckless curiosity, she reached out. Her fingertips hovered for a second, then ghosted over the ridge of the scar. The reaction was instantaneous. Si-jin's eyes snapped open, pitch black and wild. Before she could gasp, he lunged. The glass tumbler hit the floor with a dull thud as he grabbed her wrist, spinning her around and slamming her back against the nearest bookshelf. Books rattled on the shelves. His forearm pressed against her throat, not enough to choke, but enough to pin her completely. His face was inches from hers, his chest heaving, his teeth bared in a snarl of pure, defensive rage. "Who gave you permission?" he hissed, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "Do you think because I dress you in silk and let you sleep in my house, you can touch me?" Ayana couldn't breathe. Her heart hammered against his chest, her eyes wide with terror. I didn't." He tightened his grip on her wrist, his eyes burning into hers. But as he looked at her fear, the rage in his eyes began to fracture. The predator halted, realizing he was hunting a rabbit, not a wolf. His breathing slowed, but he didn't step back. The pressure on her throat eased, his hand sliding up to cup her jaw instead, his thumb tracing her trembling lip. The violence in the air shifted, curdling into something heavy, thick, and suffocatingly hot. "My father gave me this," Si-jin whispered, the confession tearing out of him like a secret he hadn't meant to spill. "He carved it into me the day I hesitated to pull the trigger. He told me it would remind me that mercy is a weakness." He leaned in closer, his lips brushing the shell of her ear. Ayana shivered, but she didn't push him away. The fear was still there, but beneath it, a strange, electric heat was blooming in her stomach. "I am not a good man, Ayana," he murmured against her skin, inhaling her scent. "And you are playing with fire." He pulled back abruptly, releasing her as if she burned him. He turned his back, fixing his suit jacket with shaking hands. "Get out," he said, his voice ragged. "Before I forget that I bought you to be an assistant, not a distraction." The annual Dragon Gala was a suffocating display of wealth, a sea of diamonds and designer silks swirling under crystal chandeliers. Ayana stood at Si-jin's side, her hand tucked stiffly into the crook of his arm. She wore a midnight blue gown that he had selected, backless, plunging, and worth more than her father's life. But she didn't feel beautiful. She felt like a trophy on display. The whispers followed them like smoke. Si-jin ignored them, his face a mask of bored indifference, until a man stepped into their path. Director Choi, the head of the Southern Syndicate, grinned, revealing gold-capped teeth. He was older, with greasy eyes that stripped Ayana naked right there in the ballroom. "Baek Si-jin," Choi drawled, swirling his champagne. "I see you brought your new acquisition. I heard you took a bad debt and turned it into a hobby." Ayana stiffened, her stomach churning with humiliation. She tried to look away, but Choi stepped closer, blocking her path. "A rare exotic import," Choi sneered, reaching out. His cold, damp fingers brushed against Ayana's bare shoulder, lingering on her skin. "How much for a night, Si-jin? I'll double whatever the girl owes." Ayana flinched, pulling back, shame burning her cheeks. The surrounding guests tittered nervously, waiting for Si-jin to laugh it off or negotiate. Si-jin didn't laugh. The movement was a blur. 1 second, Choi was smirking. The next, the sound of breaking glass and snapping bone echoed through the silent hall. Si-jin had grabbed Choi's hand, the one touching Ayana, and twisted it backward with a sickening crunch. As Choi screamed, dropping to his knees, Si-jin didn't let go. He kicked the man's legs out from under him, sending him sprawling, then stomped a polished dress shoe onto Choi's chest, pinning him to the marble floor. The music stopped. The room froze. Si-jin looked down at the whimpering boss, his face devoid of anger, which made the violence even more terrifying. He was calm, cold, lethal. "You seem confused, Director Choi," Si-jin said, his voice projecting clearly across the terrified room. He reached down, grabbed Choi by the lapels, and hauled him up, only to slam him back down onto a waiter's tray table, scattering silverware everywhere. Si-jin leaned in, his scarred brow furrowed, his eyes burning with a darkness that made the rival gangster tremble. "This woman is not a debt," Si-jin growled, the vibration of his voice hitting Ayana in the chest. "She is not an asset, and she is certainly not for sale." He straightened up, fixing his cuffs, and swept his gaze across the stunned crowd. He pulled Ayana flush against his side, his arm winding around her waist like an iron band. "She is mine," he declared, the words ringing like a final verdict. "Touch her again, and I won't just break your hand. I will take your empire." The sound of bones snapping echoed in Ayana's ears long after the music had restarted. The brutality of the gala had been a wake-up call. Baek Si-jin wasn't just a businessman. He was a violent, dangerous man, and his claim of ownership wasn't a romantic declaration, it was a threat. She had waited until he was distracted by the police cleanup crew outside the hotel. She slipped into a taxi, her heart hammering against her ribs, and whispered the one destination that offered freedom, Incheon International Airport. 3 hours later, Ayana stood in the sterile, fluorescent glare of the departures terminal. She had managed to retrieve her hidden emergency cash, enough for a one-way ticket to anywhere. Her hands shook as she handed her passport to the agent. "One seat to Nairobi," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder. Every shadow looked like a man in a black suit. I'm afraid that won't be possible. The voice didn't come from the agent. It came from behind her. Ayana spun around, her breath hitching in a strangled sob. Si-jin stood 10 feet away. He was alone. The perfect suit from the gala was rumpled, his tie missing, his hair wild and damp from the rain. He didn't look like the Shadow King. He looked like a man who had run through hell to get here. Don't, she gasped, backing up until her spine hit the ticket counter. Please. I can't do this. I can't be your pet. Si-jin stepped forward, ignoring the staring travelers. He didn't signal for guards. He didn't pull a weapon. He just reached out, his hand hovering in the air between them, trembling slightly. You think this is about the money? He asked, his voice cracking. It was the first time she had heard him sound human. You think I hunted you down for a debt? You bought me. Ayana screamed, tears finally spilling over. You took everything away from me so I would have no choice. Because it was the only way. Si-jin roared back, startling the agent behind the desk. The silence that followed was deafening. Si-jin lowered his head, the fight draining out of him. He looked up at her through his lashes, the scar on his brow stark against his pale skin. I didn't buy the debt to control you, Ayana, he whispered, stepping close enough to block out the rest of the world. I bought it because I saw you. 6 months ago. In the rain, waiting for a bus. I watched you for weeks. I knew you were drowning. I knew the sharks were circling your father. He took her hand. She was too stunned to pull away. If I hadn't bought that debt, they would have killed you, he said, his thumb brushing her pulse. I became the villain so I could be the one to keep you safe. I didn't lock you in a cage to keep you prisoner. I locked you in to keep the world out. He looked at her with a desperate, terrifying vulnerability. Run if you want. But out there, you are prey. With me. You are the only thing I have ever tried to save. The airport terminal buzzed with the mundane noise of travel. Announcements, rolling suitcases, distant chatter. But in the small space between Ayana and Si-jin, there was only silence. Si-jin reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. His hand, usually so steady when holding a gun or a whiskey glass, trembled slightly. He pulled out a folded piece of paper and held it out to her. It wasn't a contract. It was a boarding pass. First class to Nairobi. One way. I cleared the debt this morning, he said, his voice hollow, stripped of its usual command. The accounts are settled. The sponsorship ban is lifted. You are free, Ayana. He placed the ticket in her frozen hand. His fingers lingered for a second on hers, warm and calloused, before he pulled away sharply, as if touching her caused him physical pain. Go, he whispered. Before I change my mind. He turned his back on her. He walked a few steps toward the exit, his shoulders hunched, the proud, terrifying Shadow King suddenly looking like a man defeated. He didn't look back. He was giving her exactly what she had prayed for since the night she walked into Club Elysium. Ayana looked down at the ticket. It was her escape. It was her life back. It was safety. She looked up at his retreating back. She saw the tension in his frame, the way his hands were clenched into fists at his sides. She realized then that the monster wasn't leaving because he was done with her. He was leaving because he was letting her go, even though it was tearing him apart. He had been a villain, yes, a tyrant, but he had also been the only one to step between her and the abyss. In his dark, twisted, broken way, he had loved her more than he loved his own power. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Safety without him felt empty, cold. Si-jin. He stopped. He didn't turn around, his back stiffening. Slowly, deliberately, Ayana raised the boarding pass. With a sharp rip, she tore it down the middle. Then again, and again, she let the pieces flutter to the polished floor like white confetti. The sound made him turn. His eyes widened, dark and stunned, staring at the scattered paper on the ground. You said I had no home, Ayana said, her voice shaking but growing stronger with every word. She took a step toward him. You were wrong. She walked until she was standing right in front of him, close enough to see the shock fracturing his stoic mask. I'm not leaving, she whispered, reaching up to touch the scar on his brow, the one he had forbidden her to touch. This time, he didn't flinch. He leaned into her hand, closing his eyes as a shudder wrecked his body. I'm exactly where I belong. The pieces of the boarding pass lay on the floor between them, a white graveyard of the escape, she had chosen to destroy. The silence in the terminal was no longer heavy. It was electric. Si-jin stared at her, his dark eyes searching hers for a lie, a trick, anything that would explain why the bird had chosen to fly back into the cage. "You don't know what you're doing," he rasped, his voice rough with suppressed emotion. "If you stay, there is no going back. The door locks behind you, Ayana. Forever." "I know," Ayana said, her voice steady. She took another step forward, closing the final distance between them. She wasn't the terrified girl in the white dress anymore. She was the woman who had looked the devil in the eye and seen the man beneath. "But if I stay, the contract changes." Si-jin didn't move, but his gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. "Name your terms." "No more debts," she said, placing her hand flat against his chest, feeling the frantic rhythm of his heart through the expensive suit. "No more cages. I am not your assistant. I am not your prisoner. And I am certainly not your property." Si-jin covered her hand with his own, pressing it harder against his chest. The ghost of a smile touched his lips, not the cruel smirk of the Mafia Boss, but a look of reverent surrender. "Agreed," he whispered. "Everything I have is yours. The empire, the money, the blood, it's all yours." He leaned down, and this time, he didn't seize her like a predator. He waited. Ayana closed the gap, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that tasted of rain, danger, and a promise that would burn down the city. High above Seoul, the rain had stopped. The city lights sprawled out below the penthouse like a sea of diamonds, glittering and cold. But inside the glass walls, the air had changed. Ayana stood by the window, looking out at the world she now owned a part of. Si-jin stood behind her, his reflection dark and imposing in the glass, but his touch was gentle as his arms wrapped around her waist. He rested his chin on her shoulder, the scar on his brow softening in the dim light. He was the shadow that ruled the night. She was the light that made the shadows bearable. They weren't just survivors anymore. They were the king and queen of a world they would build and break together. They say love is blind, but sometimes it just sees the darkness and chooses to stay anyway. Now I have to ask you, would you have stayed with Si-jin, or would you have taken the flight? Let me know in the comments below.